Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Coach Replay Show. This week we are continuing last week's conversation with Master Sibme coach and consultant John Willis as we talk a little bit about this month's theme, which is teacher retention. What can we as leaders do to support our teachers and keep them not just in the field, but also in our buildings? If you watched last week's episode, we talked about 3 core components of maintaining teachers in our field. And that was workplace conditions, professional development, and admin and leadership support. So this part of the conversation, as we wrapped up our convo last week when we recorded, is all about the specific things that admins and leaders can do. So we hope you enjoy the episode and download our notes and takeaways. Also, follow John on social media to continue to get some great advice, wisdom, leadership, and insight from John Willis. We know you'll love him just as much as we do.
Let's talk about, the professional development, which is something that teachers that left said that they were lacking. So professional development, first and foremost, really needs to be job embedded. It
Right.
doesn't need to be another thing. Although there's several teachers that seek opportunities, both inside and outside of their local school or within their district, but just on a day-to-day basis or a weekly basis, it's just job embedded professional learning communities that come together and they have conversations about the student work, looking at student work and getting clear on what is the hypothesis that we think is going on here, and what can we try that's going to make an impact on getting students closer to an outcome that we're expecting. And so this work is going to be really important, and administrators and team leaders and coaches need to be very intentional and strategic on how they facilitate these meetings. And so another thing that teachers said is they wanted collegial conversations, and congeniality is fine. Everybody liking each other and sharing chocolate and talking about what's going on in their classroom, but collegiality is what's going to close the achievement gap. And so it doesn't have to be that complicated. I think just having team leaders use protocols that create boundaries that provide a safe space, thinking about those 4 levels of psychological safety each and every meeting, and then thinking about how can I engage the team in a conversation around our work. And so some well-crafted questions that I have that I'll, of course, you can share with the viewers that help frame those collegial conversations, and different protocols that you can run to help support that. If you try to do it off the cuff, it almost never works. It really requires, again, creating some boundaries where we're going to stay true to our time. We're going to spend this much time having this conversation, and just following team agreements and team norms that the team has developed that is going to help them have those meaningful conversations and get the results that they're looking for. So I just mentioned team agreements, also known as norms. So teams will develop these all the time. Well, something that an administrator or a team leader could do as well is when you're developing team agreements, using guiding questions to help the team reframe what type of norms that they want in order to get the work done. And from my experience, if you frame those based on the 4 levels of psychological safety, the team is going to have some rich conversations about what they think they need, both individually and collectively, in order to feel included and feel safe to learn and feel safe to contribute, and have those conversations so that they're feeling supported and valued. And that is what's going to keep teachers in the classroom is when they feel supported and they feel valued. So first and foremost, just job-embedded professional development. Our professional learning communities, I sometimes call them collaborative learning teams, coming together consistently with an agenda that honors the work of a professional learning community, which means no business items. The work is focused on student achievement and learning as a team so that we get better. Coaching and coaching with videos is so important. So having coaches, even a team leader or an administrator working with teachers individually to help them get clear and get an awareness. I think it's not as easy as we think to have a true awareness of your own teaching.
Yeah.
For one thing, we have our own biases, but also our bandwidth can only handle so much when we're trying to manage a classroom of students. And so we don't see everything because we just simply don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. So having a reflective partner or a coach sitting down with you and debriefing a video where the teacher takes the lead, is identifying their own goal, identifying their own strategies and hypotheses that they want to undergo to reach those goals, and just having a coach or a partner to help think through and discuss that so that they have a greater awareness and they're getting clear on cause and effect, which is another area that a lot of teachers are weak on. What are the actions I'm taking and how are those impacting the student actions and the outcomes? And then I'd say lastly, making sure that those two things are connected. That is the job embedded professional development or the professional learning communities that are meeting weekly and the coaching that's happening with individual teachers on the side. Hopefully those things are dovetailing. So what I mean by that is the team has an initiative, something they're working on, a big problem that they're trying to solve. So that should color and provide context to the coaching that's happening on an individual basis. So it doesn't really make sense for teachers to just be out in left field working on something when it doesn't have a direct connection to what the team's working on. So I think that is important as well. And that's easy to do. A teacher could work on just about anything and connect it back to the team's overarching goal and purpose. And then I made light of it at the beginning, but let's not underestimate the value of mentoring and induction. But just know that that has to fit into this context that we're talking about, where teachers are getting quality professional development that's part of the work, and that they feel safe to learn and safe to contribute on a daily basis.
Yeah, and you mentioned video, and oftentimes those who are interested in the idea of bringing video into their coaching or even into their PLCs are a little weary about asking teachers to record themselves because they think it, takes away a little bit of the safety piece.
Right,
but,
right.
I know Sibme has done several case studies with districts and schools who have, just in the way that you're talking about, made sure that the work is connected, made sure that it was focused, teacher driven, and really kind of manageable within those days that they have with their teachers.
Yeah.
They found that their teachers come away feeling more supported and more engaged, right? There's the autonomy piece, the authentic engagement, and it connects to the bigger piece of what they're doing within their learning communities. And that's powerful. So again, video is this kind of, sometimes I refer to it as like the sword of Shira. It's this really powerful, mighty tool or weapon that we have that, as long as we're using it correctly, right, it can do so much good for our teachers. So, and that's definitely something that here on the Coach Replay Show, we're an advocate of, the use of video in professional learning for sure. But again, even, throughout this, I'm thinking about that third element, the admin and leader support to make sure that there's the time for these things to happen, to make sure that we take the time to set those team agreements and follow through with that, and that our instructional coaches are honoring the learning communities and the individuals' own choice around their professional growth, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to kind of the deficit model of coaching and the voluntold approach to that, for sure. So when it comes to admin and leader
Yeah.
support, John,
Yeah.
where do you start to see some of the key things? We've talked about a couple of the ways that our leaders can start to foster psychological safety. But what
Yeah.
else can they do?
Yeah, let's zero in on that a little bit. So first, I'd like to say, and we spoke to this a little bit earlier, the idea of goal setting. We know goal setting is very important, but I think sometimes we overemphasize goals and underemphasize the actions that need to be taken in order to get to the goal.
Right.
So coming up with a great goal, articulating, crafting a smart goal is not going to get the result. That just helps us get that awareness. So
Mm-hmm.
I have a document that I'll pull up here on a theory of action that I've adapted, modified a little bit from Steve Barkley, who I've mentioned a couple of times. This is just probably one of the most impactful activities I've done with a school system.
Mm-hmm.
School systems have adopted this across the board. It's great with teams. I've done it with individual teachers to help them with their thinking. So let's talk through this. If we start on the right-hand side with student outcomes, this is where we want to come up with a goal. So based on data, of course, schools are good at that. That's never an issue. Is looking at
Right.
data.
New data.
So based on the data, what are the gaps? So that's always a healthy, positive activity, powerful activity that teams can do. It only gets us so far, though. So we need to get clear on what that is. And it should be something that we feel like we can reach and it's actionable. Things like, ensure that 100% of our students reach exemplary on this particular district assessment by the end of the year. That's a great goal and all, but maybe it's not really realistic, and it's not even getting to the crux of the problem. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes it's looking at data, seeing where the gaps are, and then trying to understand underneath that, what are some things that we think students could work on, improve, that's going to then domino into greater gains. So we identify the student outcome, and then we identify the one stakeholder that has the most direct impact. We might even say the only impact on student achievement. And when I ask educators this, they always say teachers, of course. And the answer is students. It's not teachers, it's students.
Mm.
Students have really the only impact on student achievement. Students are the ones that decide to come to school, to engage with their peers, to pick up a pencil and record their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to do is get really clear, and you can see this document does it, is what are the actions that we want to see students doing when we walk in the classroom. You'd be surprised, Corey, how difficult that is for teachers to answer. You'll
Right.
hear things like uh, more engaged. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, teams coming together and really having some conversation. So just having that conversation is part of a PLC. That would be a very powerful meeting, is teams unpacking what they hope to see students doing when they walk in the room. And then you can even break that up by different groups to help ensure equity and meeting the needs of all our students. But once we identify the student actions, that's now going to inform the teacher actions. Now, what we often do is we have student goals and we go straight to the teacher actions, and we skip the most important part, which is what the students should be doing.
Mm.
So once we identify clearly what students are doing, then we can more clearly, with more intention, start to understand and identify what we can do to influence those student actions. And so a good way to ask that is, what do I need to learn to help ensure that students are meeting, that are engaging in the actions that we said are important? So
Mm-hmm.
again, the professional learning community is where teachers are going to do that, identify those
Mm-hmm.
actions and learn that. All right, then we get into this fourth column from right to left, PLC. So the team, what's the team doing? So we know we've identified what the teacher should do. What should the team be doing now? So what should the team be learning to help ensure that teachers are have the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions in order to implement the most important actions that are going to impact student actions? That's complicated. That's not that simple. We can go to Teach Like a Champion and get some amazing strategies, and the team comes together and just talk about what that looks like. What does that look like for us? So that might be watching videos, looking at student work, doing book chapter,
Mm-hmm.
uh, observing one another's classrooms. What do we need to do as a team to learn and get a better understanding of what those teacher actions are? Now, guess what? When the team has done that, they probably just realized, oh, because we've learned something new now, I want to go back to the student actions because I've just figured out a list of
Mm-hmm.
7 more things that we didn't even think about,
Right.
which then inform the teacher actions, which then informs the PLC actions again. Okay, now to your question. So Corey, you asked me, what should admin be doing? That's our last column.
Mm-hmm.
What are leaders doing to support this team and to support teachers? So I wrote here, what leader coach, because I like to think of our our administrators as coaches as well. What leader coach actions are needed to allow for the learning to happen? What actions does leader coach need to do to support this work? So they might be thinking about, okay, John talked about this importance of the 4 levels of psychological safety. How am I ensuring that I am cultivating psychological safety on this team? What protocols would help to ensure that we're having the right conversations based on the actions that we've identified? Here's an important one that we often miss. What are the systems and processes that are currently in place in my building that might compete with what we just said is important to do
Mm-hmm.
to close the achievement gap? Have I actually do we actually have systems in place that are competing commitments, and which leads teachers to just not know what to do? So there's a little lack of system integrity there. So we say that X, Y, and Z is important, but then we do something else because the system requires it. Uh, that is going to be that's going to be a fast track to get teachers to leave education. That's going to
Right.
be a big
All those
reason why
competing priorities. Yeah.
competing commitments, competing priorities. And I would, Corey, I'd like to differentiate that from
Mm-hmm.
priorities. So there are competing priorities. That is big. But competing commitments is having something in place that's actually preventing us from even doing the things that we said is important.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that could be logistical, or it could be something more fundamental. Let's see if I can think of an example. For example, we say that we want teachers to uh, implement some actions that we've discovered should really make an impact on student achievement. And so we've identified those. And yet we never give the teacher time to plan how they're going to do that in their classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So if a teacher doesn't have time to plan how they're going to implement those best practices, then chances are, just from a path of least resistance and survival, they will do what the administration has said they're responsible for doing when they come and do observation. So I'm going to make sure that when an administrator comes in, I'm doing this, this, and this. So I check the
Right.
boxes and not really implement what we said would actually make a difference. Because if I do, I might get dinged on one of my evaluations. Another one might be, let's say an instructional leadership team comes together and a principal says, I want you to come together and make some decisions about our instruction for a particular initiative. And the team works very hard to do that. And then it turns out that actually the principal is held accountable from their assistant superintendent. So they cannot give decision making to the instructional leadership team, because their job is based on, you know, their evaluations. So there's a
Mhm.
little bit of a competing commitment. So we might
Right.
say we want instructional leadership team to make decisions, but yet the principal may not realize they're not in a place to even do that. So
Mhm.
these are all complicated, and a leader just needs to think, where is there resistance in what I'm asking teachers to do? Is there resistance points? Are there barriers that I can remove? Is there some unspoken norms that might be getting
Mhm.
in the way? And the only way to do that is to talk to teachers. So talk to the team, check in with individual teachers. A powerful uh, document that I'm also providing after this is the stages of concern. Shirley Hord and Gene Hall came up with a couple of decades ago, which is really powerful, based on concerns-based adoption model. And it's just how you can communicate with teachers throughout the building to find out what are some concerns they have,
Mhm.
how well are they implementing a certain initiative, and we're listening for resistance points and for barriers. And that is the job of an administrator, is to be on constant lookout for things they can do to make it easy for
Right.
teachers to engage in the behaviors that we say are important. If teachers have to make a heroic effort to implement what we say is important, it's likely not going to happen because it's just too hard. So we want to
Mhm.
make the desired actions to be easy, and undesired actions to be hard. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It actually reminds me of one of the 7 coaching questions from Michael Bungay Stainer's book, The Coaching Habit, which is one of my favorites, especially in this kind of time of overwhelm and deep stress with the educators I've worked with. Is, okay, if we're going to say yes to this, we've decided that this is a thing we want to do,
Yes.
what do we have to say no to, even if it's
Yes.
just temporarily, right? Like, I
Mhm.
have to say no to this as I'm learning this and getting that kind of under my wing pretty well, and then I can maybe kind of manage both of those. But what do we have to say no to temporarily, permanently?
Right.
And that's such a powerful conversation, I think. And I think it's definitely one that those leader coaches, right, the administrators, those who are kind of supporting the teachers, can be direct and ask as they're working with the PLC or even one-on-one. And then as the process goes on as well, like, what are your concerns? It kind of aligns so well with that, I think.
Yeah, we try to do everything, we do nothing well. If we just
Exactly.
narrow our priorities, as you said earlier, with the competing priorities, if we narrow those, we'll
Hmm.
we'll do those few really well.
Yeah, and it also just, it again, going back to psychological safety, it recognizes that to really make a change, to really innovate, we have to make space for that. We have to make space for some failure, for some new ahas, new ideas, for some changing of those ideas that we originally had. It takes space. We have to stop doing something in order to start doing something else, whether we're going to pick that other thing up again later or not. um, I don't think is as much of the concern as, what do we just need to let go of right now so this can
Right.
happen.
Right.
Yeah. And again, that brings more autonomy to our teachers. I think it improves our work conditions. It deepens the professional development. So we actually start to see it happen in the classrooms. I mean, I think they're all these connected elements for sure as we kind of look at these different pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
You got it.
So I'm looking at the time in our episode, and I think you and I could go a whole day talking about this, because it really is just it's such a valuable thing that many of our leaders and our organizations, really, it's not always the leader. It's sometimes, as you mentioned, the system within which they are trying to make the change and provide the support. Sometimes it's the system that's a little bit in our way. We see it, though, time and time again. This is something that we just kind of struggle with. And to the best of our efforts, we still have the leaky bucket. So as we kind of wrap up and on this piece of admin and leader support, what else? What else would you have to say for our viewers that's valuable? I know you'll have a lot of resources on the notes and takeaways that folks can download, or they get directly in their inbox if they've subscribed to our emails. But what else can our admins do aside from supporting the goal of the PLC and the individuals?
Yeah, for sure. I think the last thing I'd probably say about the work of administrators, of course, an important part of that is the evaluations that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So if evaluations are aligned to coaching that is happening, so we're having collegial conversations about what a teacher is working on, what their goal is, some strategies that they're implementing. How is that aligned to the evaluation?
Mm-hmm.
Is the administrator having those kind of conversations? And also, I said everything should be aligned to what the team is doing as well. So in that theory of action document where we saw all the stakeholders' actions that need to happen in order to reach our outcome, that should be a part of the evaluation as well. Meaning, if the team has identified the teacher actions that they think are important to reach a certain outcome, then the administrator should be looking for those actions when they do their walkthroughs.
Mm-hmm.
So just making sure that administrator is tuned in to what a team is doing, what they're talking about, the hypotheses that they're working on,
Mm-hmm.
so that when they're having those conversations, they're providing support, they're looking for areas where they could make sure they're making it as easy as possible for teachers to implement. And when they're observing what's happening in the classroom, they should be looking for the things that is based on what the team is working on, as opposed to just something that is on a sheet of paper that they agree they're going to do all year. That's fine, but where's the context of that based on what the team's working on? And teams appreciate that. Teachers appreciate that. They want to get feedback on what they say they're working on, as opposed to what I mentioned earlier. Oh, I got to pause. I can't actually implement that today because I got to do a little song and dance over here to make sure I get the evaluation. So administrators could go a long way to help ensure that everything's aligned in terms of the work that we talked about today.
Yeah, and I think it also, establishes a sense of accountability around that work. Setting that is valuable, and accountability is not missing from the equation of psychological safety as well.
Absolutely
so I think that, again, it's that sensibility piece, that alignment that I think goes so well within that. And again, recognizing their contribution, their effort, the ways that they are, bringing in innovative ways to close that achievement gap. John, it's been so wonderful having you on the show today, and really being able to kind of talk through some of these big pieces. It's such an important part. We should be talking about teacher retention all year long, not just here at the end of the year as people are making decisions on their contracts. But I think this will be a really valuable episode and set of resources that you've pulled together for our viewers and listeners in the notes and takeaways. So I just want to remind folks to be sure to access that. And you'll also, if you love listening to John as much as I love listening to John talk, definitely be able to figure out how you can follow him either through his website, johnwilliscoaching.com, or on LinkedIn, as he continues to just share great things, important resources, inspirational things for us as leaders throughout the year. So, John, any last kind of words of wisdom for our viewers as we wrap up today?
Just be present, be easy, be kind.
Definitely. So important, especially as we think about how we're supporting others who are showing up every day and doing the best they can. So
that's right.
All right, folks, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the Coach Replay Show so you never miss an episode or a replay. And we will see you all next week on the Coach Replay Show. Thanks, John.
Bye, everybody.